Somewhere off the Mississippi coast, a marine radio call connects to a private towing company called Sea-Tow. A teenage voice is on the other end. The dispatcher runs through the basics: boat location, membership number, and then asks the question that would come to define this entire case. Is everybody on board? Everybody safe? The voice answers without hesitation. Yeah, everybody's on board. Except everybody wasn't on board. 18-year-old Nolan Wells, an incoming football player at Southwest Mississippi Community College, was still on Horn Island, alone, on a barrier island with no residents, no cell towers, and no way to call for help. 2 days later, a National Park Service ranger would find his body in the water off the island's northwestern tip. The question this case has been asking for over 3 weeks now isn't just, how did Nolan Wells die? It's this. In the hours after he was left behind, why did the people who knew he was missing not call 911? And why, when they finally did talk to investigators, did their stories keep changing? To understand what happened to Nolan Wells, you have to understand where it happened. Horn Island sits about 10 miles off the coast of Ocean Springs, Mississippi, a strip of federally protected, uninhabited land that's part of the Gulf Islands National Seashore. There's no bridge, no dock infrastructure, no cell service to speak of. You get there by boat and only by boat. For teenagers on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, Horn Island is also something else entirely, a legendary 4th of July hangout. Locals describe it as the place where half of Jackson County's graduating seniors show up with coolers and jet skis for one last blowout before summer ends. Nolan reportedly wasn't a stranger to it either. According to family and friends, he'd made the trip out before. On July 4, 2026, Nolan rode out to the island on a boat with a group of friends. Reporting has generally described the group as riding out on a smaller recreational boat, though the exact make and head count on board has varied slightly across accounts. Most put the group at around 7 people. By the accounts we have so far, it was a normal holiday afternoon. Swimming, music, a crowd of other boats anchored nearby. And then, at some point in the mid-afternoon, something changed. The boat's engine and pump began having mechanical trouble, and somewhere in the scramble that followed, the boat left the island, without Nolan. His body was recovered 2 days later, on July 6th, by a National Park Service ranger, on the northwest end of the island, an area locals have nicknamed for its rough, unpredictable current. He was still fully clothed. Meanwhile, his friends had already returned to the mainland the day he disappeared, with his phone and his keys still in their possession. Here's where this case takes its first strange turn. When the boat started having trouble on the water, the group didn't call the Coast Guard. They didn't call 911. They called a private towing service, Sea-Tow. That call sat mostly out of public view for weeks. Then, just this past week, the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources released the actual audio. On the recording, you can hear the confusion play out in real time, mixed up membership numbers, uncertainty about exact coordinates, a young voice trying to relay information under pressure. At one point, Coast Guard assistance is reportedly offered and declined, and then comes the line that's been dissected online for weeks. The dispatcher's question about whether everyone is safe and accounted for, and the answer that everyone was fine. Nolan is not mentioned. Now, to be fair to the people on that call, boats have mechanical trouble on the water all the time, and calling a towing service instead of the Coast Guard isn't itself suspicious. Lots of boaters do exactly that for a stalled engine. What makes this call different is timing. This wasn't just, our boat needs a tow. According to the sequence investigators have laid out, this was the same window in which Nolan was left on the island. So the real question isn't about the tow call itself. It's about what wasn't said on it, and why nobody flagged that a teenager wasn't with them. Jackson County Sheriff John Ledbetter has been careful in public statements not to get ahead of the evidence. Early on, he told reporters that no foul play had been identified at this time, a phrase that leaves plenty of room for the investigation to move in either direction. He's also acknowledged that getting this right is going to take time, telling one Mississippi TV affiliate that people want answers immediately, but accurate answers don't work that way. In the days after Nolan's disappearance, at least two different explanations circulated for why he was left behind. The first, that Nolan had struck up a conversation with a girl on the island and chose to stay. This past week, that detail took a significant turn. The girl in question was reportedly identified as 19-year-old Katie McCormick. According to her sister, Gracie McCormick, speaking to the Daily Mail, Katie has said Nolan told her he was heading back to get on his boat, and that she assumed his friends wouldn't leave without him. Katie McCormick herself has not spoken publicly. Her family says she's fully cooperated with both investigators and the Wells family. That account directly conflicts with what some of Nolan's friends have said. One of them, Warren Hudson, gave an interview describing a chaotic scene, the boat taking on water, panic setting in, and an assumption that Nolan would catch another ride back with someone else on the island. Hudson has said he personally urged Nolan to get back on the boat before it left. Family attorney Ben Crump, who's represented the Wells family since the earliest days of this case, has pointed directly at that contradiction. If Katie McCormack's account is accurate, Nolan intended to get on the boat. If the friend's account is accurate, he chose to stay. Both can't be true. Then there's the digital evidence that didn't hold up. A pool photo that briefly circulated online as proof of what Nolan was doing on July 4th turned out, once metadata was checked, to have been taken roughly a week earlier. And a piece of shoreline video showing what sounds like a heated confrontation has become its own subplot. Investigators have specifically asked the public for unedited originals of any July 4th footage that might show an altercation involving Nolan, which tells you they haven't ruled out that something happened on that beach before the boat ever left. It's worth pausing here on just how fast this story mutated online before any of these details were confirmed. In the first 48 hours after Nolan's disappearance, social media had already produced half a dozen competing narratives, some claiming a fight broke out over a girl, some claiming Nolan never made it onto the boat in the first place, some pushing far more extreme theories with zero sourcing behind them at all. A crime analysis commentator who's been tracking the case for News Nation put it bluntly. With that many people on the island that day, on a holiday weekend, the odds that somebody's phone camera unknowingly caught Nolan in the background of a video or photo are extremely high. Which is exactly why investigators have been so insistent on getting original, unedited files rather than anything that's already been re-uploaded, compressed, or clipped for social media. That distinction matters more than it might sound. Once a photo or video gets uploaded to a platform, reposted, and compressed a few times, the metadata that could confirm exactly when and where it was taken is often stripped out entirely. That's part of why the pool photo mix-up was even possible and why investigators are still asking the public weeks later for anything unaltered still sitting on someone's phone. Warren Hudson's account, for what it's worth, has stayed largely consistent across the interviews he's given. The boat taking on water, the scramble to get everyone off the island, and his own insistence that he told Nolan to get back on board before they left. But largely consistent isn't the same as corroborated. Investigators have reportedly interviewed the other friends who were on that boat multiple times each, and while the broad shape of their accounts lines up, mechanical trouble, panic, an assumption someone else would look out for Nolan, the smaller details, like exactly when Nolan was last seen and by whom, have reportedly shifted somewhat from interview to interview. That's not necessarily evidence of a cover-up. Traumatized 18-year-olds recalling a chaotic afternoon rarely give police a perfectly clean, unchanging story, but it is exactly the kind of inconsistency a grand jury will be built to pressure test. Human memory bends under pressure. Location data generally doesn't. And that's part of why the timeline in this case has become such a flashpoint. Reporting has broadly described the shape of that afternoon this way. Nolan is last seen on the island in the mid-afternoon. Sometime after that, the boat leaves without him. It doesn't go straight to a marina and stop. It continues moving through the area for a significant stretch before eventually returning to the dock. And notably, in that entire window, there's no confirmed report of anyone contacting the Coast Guard, search and rescue, or Nolan's family to say he'd been left behind. Nolan's mother, Christine Wansley, has said publicly that she didn't hear from her son that night. Instead, she got a call from one of his friends about his disappearance and made the decision herself to start tracking his phone. That's how his phone was ultimately located, at a friend's residence, after the group had already returned from the island. Investigators have interviewed roughly 60 witnesses so far, and the 3 friends who were on the boat with Nolan have reportedly been interviewed in depth more than once. Sheriff Ledbetter has said the sheer number of people on that island on a holiday weekend means there's a wide pool of second-hand video and photos still being sorted through. Anyone with a phone out that day may have unknowingly caught Nolan on camera without realizing it. 60 witnesses is a large number for a case like this, and it tells you something about scale. This wasn't a quiet dock with 3 or 4 boats. It was a packed holiday scene with dozens of groups anchored within sight of each other. That's a double-edged sword for investigators. On one hand, more witnesses generally means more chances to corroborate or contradict any single account. On the other, it means more competing memories of a chaotic, loud, sun and alcohol afternoon, recalled under the added pressure of knowing a teenager later died. Memory researchers will tell you that's close to a worst-case scenario for eyewitness reliability. Which is exactly why investigators have leaned so heavily on physical records like location data and the towing company audio instead of relying on any one person's recollection. That's also why the Sheriff's Department has continued to put out public appeals for tips weeks after the initial search wrapped up. Every new photo or video that surfaces from a stranger's phone is another data point that doesn't depend on anyone's memory holding up under questioning. Then there's the phone. Nolan's phone was eventually returned to his mother, but according to the family, the content that should have been there from July 4th, the Snapchat activity, the photos, the messages, was gone. Family members have said messages had been deleted by the time they got access to it. For a teenager who, by every account, documented his life constantly on social media, a completely blank July 4th is its own kind of red flag. This is the detail that's pushed the case from tragic accident territory into we need forensic experts territory. Ben Crump has said his team will conduct a joint digital extraction of the phone, meaning family-hired experts and law enforcement experts examine it side by side at the same time, so neither side can claim the other tampered with anything or got a head start. That mutual inspection has reportedly been agreed to by the Jackson County District Attorney's Office as well. Whether that process turns up a technical explanation, a crashed app, a failed backup, or something more troubling remains to be seen. But the fact that both sides felt the need for a simultaneous, monitored extraction tells you how much trust is currently missing from this investigation. There's also a chain of custody problem underneath all of this that's easy to miss. Before Nolan's mother ever got the device back, that phone passed through at least one other set of hands, the friend at whose residence it was ultimately located. Digital forensics experts will tell you that's exactly the kind of gap that makes deleted data cases hard to prosecute either way. On one hand, data can be recovered from a device even after deletion, because deleted often just means a file is marked as free space rather than actually erased, at least until something else overwrites it. On the other hand, once outside custody like that enters the picture, any defense attorney down the line can argue the data simply can't be trusted as untouched evidence. That's precisely why the joint extraction process matters so much to how this case eventually gets resolved, assuming it goes anywhere near a courtroom. If forensic examiners working for both sides watch the same extraction happen in real time, on camera, using the same tools, neither side can later claim the results were altered or selectively presented. It's slower, it's more expensive, but it's about the only way to get a result that both the family and any future defense can't credibly dispute. As of this recording, no timeline has been given publicly for when that joint extraction will actually happen. which means, for now, the most direct piece of evidence in this entire case is still sitting untouched. This case has now grown well past a single sheriff's department. The FBI's Jackson field office has confirmed it's assisting Jackson County investigators, specifically around digital forensics and around threats that have reportedly been made against people connected to the case. In a public statement, the Bureau has been careful to frame its role as support for the local investigation rather than a takeover of it, and to note, it's specifically looking into interstate threats made against individuals tied to the case. Here's an important distinction, because headlines can make this sound bigger than it is. Jackson County District Attorney Angel Myers McElrath has confirmed that once the sheriff's investigation wraps up, the findings will go before a grand jury. Officials have been explicit that this does not automatically mean anyone suspects a crime occurred. It's simply the standard next step for an unresolved death investigation of this profile. A grand jury doesn't convict anyone. It decides whether there's enough evidence to justify formal charges at all. That said, going to a grand jury does raise the legal stakes for everyone involved. Witnesses testify under oath. Phone records, the towing company audio, and prior statements to police can all be compared side by side. If someone's account to a reporter doesn't match their sworn testimony, or doesn't match the data, that's a problem that goes well beyond public opinion. As of this past week, DA McElrath has publicly pushed back on criticism about the pace of the investigation, saying, in her own words paraphrased, that the case is being handled with the same care as any death investigation, and that the office isn't slow-walking it, but making sure every piece of evidence is actually examined before conclusions are drawn. It's worth sitting with that tension for a second, because it's at the center of basically every high-profile unresolved case like this one. The public wants an answer now. A grand jury process, almost by design, does not move at the speed of a news cycle. Prosecutors have to assemble a complete evidentiary record, every witness statement, every phone record, every piece of digital forensics, before they hand anything to a jury of ordinary citizens who will then decide, in secret, whether the evidence clears the bar for formal charges. That process can take weeks past when the last headline runs. It doesn't mean nothing is happening behind the scenes. It usually means the opposite, that a lot is happening, just not in public view yet. 3 weeks in, the one thing everyone hoped would bring clarity, the autopsy, has done the opposite. The state's official autopsy and toxicology results have not been publicly released, pending the grand jury process. So the Wells family commissioned their own independent autopsy, performed by Dr. Roger Mitchell. The result, delivered at a press conference in late July, inconclusive. Ben Crump said plainly that the findings could not rule out whether some non-accidental factor contributed to Nolan's death, but also, notably, that the independent pathologist found no direct evidence of wrongdoing either. It's genuinely open. Part of the uncertainty comes down to biology, not conspiracy. Nolan's body had been in Gulf water for 2 days before it was recovered, and decomposition in that environment moves fast. A deep red discoloration on the back of the head was noted during the independent review, and outside forensic experts asked to weigh in, including a chief medical examiner from Texas not connected to the case, have said that kind of discoloration could plausibly be either decompositional change or a sign of blunt force trauma. Without a controlled crime scene and an intact recovery timeline, it's genuinely hard to tell those two things apart after the fact. The independent team has not said whether every anatomical structure needed to rule out neck trauma was available for their review, and flagging it as something to verify before there's a broader forensic reality worth explaining here, because it's easy to assume a second autopsy should just settle things, and that's not really how it works. By the time an independent pathologist gets access to a body, the state examiner has already performed the first primary autopsy, which means Organs may have already been removed, sectioned, or sent out for testing, and some tissue may no longer be in its original position or even present at all. A second look, however skilled the pathologist, is often working with what's left over, not a pristine, untouched body. That's a real limitation, independent of anyone's competence or good faith. It's simply the order these procedures happen in. That context matters because it means inconclusive isn't necessarily a red flag on its own. In a body recovered after 2 days in Gulf water, following a first autopsy that's already been completed, inconclusive might genuinely be the most honest finding an independent examiner could offer. What we can say with confidence: as of this recording, cause and manner of death remain officially undetermined. That's not unusual for a case this complex, but it does mean every theory currently circulating online, from accidental drowning to something far worse, is still just that, a theory. Nolan's funeral was held on July 20th at Centerpoint Church in Ocean Springs, with Reverend Al Sharpton officiating. Filmmaker Tyler Perry covered the funeral costs for the family. At an emotional press conference, Nolan's father, Elmore Wansley, said his son should have been at football practice, not in the ground, and that his family simply wants the truth about what happened. His mother, Christine Wansley, has repeatedly said the goal isn't revenge. It's a complete, transparent accounting. Nothing held back, nothing overlooked. The case has also drawn national attention and financial backing beyond the family's immediate circle. Rev. Al Sharpton, Tyler Perry, and former NFL wide receiver Terrell Owens have collectively offered a $125,000 reward for information leading to an arrest and conviction, if it turns out a crime occurred. The NAACP has gone further than most outside organizations. Its national president, Derek Johnson, stood at a press conference and directly accused early investigators of being derelict in their duties, his words, arguing that the response in the first days after Nolan went missing didn't match the seriousness of a teenager unaccounted for on a remote island. The organization has since passed a formal resolution calling on law enforcement, including specifically the U.S. Department of Justice, to conduct a fully transparent review of exactly how Nolan came to be left behind in the first place, separate from whatever the criminal investigation ultimately finds. That national attention has cut in more than one direction, and it's worth being honest about that on camera rather than pretending this case exists in a vacuum. Some commentators have drawn comparisons between the public response here and other cases that became national flashpoints in recent years. Comparisons that Nolan's own family has at times pushed back on, preferring to keep the focus on their son specifically rather than on any broader symbolism. Other voices in the media have pushed back just as hard in the opposite direction, arguing the case is being over-politicized before the facts are even in. Both of those reactions are, in a sense, proof of the same underlying problem. 3 weeks in, there still isn't enough confirmed information to settle the argument either way, which hasn't stopped either side from arguing anyway. What isn't in dispute is the toll this has taken on the people closest to it. Both of Nolan's parents have described receiving threats since going public, serious enough that the FBI's involvement now extends beyond the phone forensics into looking at interstate threats against people connected to the case, including reportedly some of the teenagers who were with Nolan on the island. Whatever actually happened out there on July 4th, the fallout has made this one of the most closely watched and most emotionally volatile, unresolved cases in the country right now. Strip away the theories, and here's what's actually confirmed as of this week. Nolan Wells went to Horn Island with friends on July 4th. He didn't come home with them. His body was found 2 days later, and more than 3 weeks on, his cause of death is still officially undetermined. The friends who were with him have given accounts that don't fully match each other. Or, according to the family's attorney, the account of the girl he reportedly spoke to before he was left behind. The FBI is involved. A grand jury is coming, and a phone that should be full of memories from that day is, for reasons nobody's explained yet, empty. Was this a chain of panicked, very human mistakes on a day that went wrong fast? Or is there something in that 6+ hour gap between the boat leaving and anyone calling for help that someone is still not saying out loud? Right now, nobody outside of that boat knows for certain. And until the physical evidence, the phone data, and the sworn testimony all get laid side by side in front of that grand jury, every account we have is still just that, an account, not a fact. If you want to stay with this case as it develops, and there is clearly more coming, make sure you're subscribed, because we will be back with updates the moment the grand jury process moves, or that independent phone extraction turns up something new. If this breakdown helped you actually understand the timeline, instead of just the headlines, hit that like button. It genuinely helps this kind of reporting reach more people. Share this with someone who's been following the case, because half the confusion out there is coming from people repeating things that were already debunked weeks ago. And down in the comments, let me know 2 things: where you're watching from tonight, and which detail in this case bothers you the most: the towing call, the blank phone, or the timeline gap. I read every one of them. Stay safe out there. I'll see you in the next one.